where he talks about there have been other manifestations. This is not the first time that the experiment of human life has taken place. So anyway, this particular manifestation is, at another point Mother says, the seventh, and it will not disappear. It will continue to grow into that union, the state of union. And that requires each of us to find our true individuality. When I look at what Mother and Sri Aurobindo have said, and I look at it again, I have to put aside everything that I've understood about spirituality up to now. Because up to now, largely all over the world, if there has been a spiritual pursuit, it has been finally to abandon manifestation. The idea is that the earth is mithya, is maya. It is, even in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, anityam asukham lokam. It's a world that's filled with sorrow and suffering. So all the solutions, even the solution at the time of Sri Krishna, the followers of Sri Krishna are Vaishnavites. They too leave their bodies and they go to an eternal world called Golok Dham. Never before has there been a proposal of a spiritual journey which is so integral, which aims at manifesting the life divine upon earth. And the laws of such a journey are completely different to whatever has been proposed before. So if we look at, finally, if you want to understand Auroville, we have to turn to what has been said by Mother when she founded Auroville. So the text is the Auroville Charter. And then a few years later, when Aurovillians begin to say, okay, why are we here? What are we here to do? And as a result of that question, what are called aspiration talks, what emerges is to be a true Aurovillian. It's 6 points. It starts with the first necessity being finding your psychic being, and it ends with the new world, with a new creation. So there are 4 points that belong to the human stage, and the last 2 points belong to the new creation. So in just those 4 points, she's already taken us beyond anything that humanity has ever considered as in their aspiration to do something. So if we look at to be a true Aurovillian, if we look at the charter, the yoga is complete in each of those texts. They are absolute mantric texts, and they contain so many, physics, science has arrived at the idea that opposite truths confirm each other. They call them complementarities. So if you look at are invited to Auroville, all people of goodwill, we all say we are people of goodwill, though the moment someone provokes us, that's the first thing we lose. It's very hard to remain good-willed when life circumstances are creating difficulties for you, and often the difficulties come from other individuals. So goodwill is a yogic condition. It's not something that we naturally embody. So she says, I invited to Auroville people of goodwill. This she says long before Auroville starts. She also says, before Auroville starts, that the spirit of Auroville has not yet been grounded in matter. And so when you look at the launching of Auroville by 1968, there's been such a progression from 1964, when the idea is first. Actually, it's a very old idea. She thought of it even before she came to Sri Aurobindo. She had always dreamed of creating a city of God, and actually this idea of creating a city that would be at the service of the truth, of bringing down a higher force, is present in all spiritual journeys. The idea of creating a perfect society. It's one of the oldest dreams of humanity. But she always thought of creating a city with Sri Aurobindo at the center. And then she put aside the idea when Sri Aurobindo left his body. then the idea began to come forward. I have always felt the idea of Auroville is profoundly linked to the manifestation of this new consciousness that took place on the 29th of February 1956. This is what the whole yoga of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. Sometimes, you know, people think that Sri Aurobindo, he came to Pondicherry in 1910. In 1926, he withdraws. He writes lots of letters, but he doesn't come out of his room. What was he doing? Exactly, what was he doing for 40 years in Pondi? He was trying to bring down into manifestation this new principle. Finally, he had to go into death, go to the other side and work from there, and Mother remains in manifestation, and together they try to bring this new consciousness down. Because Sri Aurobindo says that until I bring this new principle. So he accepts the Vedantic idea of a sevenfold world. There's the upper hemisphere of Sachidananda. There is the lower hemisphere of mind, life and body. And then there is this fourth plane, fourth from above, fourth from below, which is, the Veda calls it the Turiyam Svidh. Sri Aurobindo calls it the supermind, Vijnana. And he argues from the very beginning that unless this plane is brought into manifestation, it is there, it is present in each of our consciousness, because each of us is linked to all 7 planes. But manifestation becomes, it becomes the dharma of the earth, that this principle is now active in earthly manifestation. So this principle has to be brought down. Through the 30s, he's talking about, I have the tail of the supermind, and he cannot bring it into manifestation. So many things intervene. In 1933, I think it is, that Hitler comes to power, and suddenly something is growing. Fascism is growing in Italy, and Nazism is growing. You have Stalin in Russia. Somehow energies and powers that seem to be completely opposed to bringing something beautiful into manifestation are running the earth, large parts of it. And Sri Aurobindo and Mother begin to focus on dealing with that. And there is a period in the ashram where both Sri Aurobindo and Mother have to say, please do not even think in your consciousness that the Germans are our friends, because as long as Nazism is in charge of Germany, it is dangerous for the earth, it is dangerous for Mother's yoga, Mother's manifestation of the new consciousness. You know that the Indians at that time, because they're wanting to get the British out, felt the enemy of the enemy is a friend. And both Sri Aurobindo and Mother begin to say things publicly for the first time, which is something that Sri Aurobindo hasn't done from 1910 till the Stafford Cripps mission to India, which is proposing dominion status for India. Sri Aurobindo has not said anything publicly to India. At that time, he sends an official telegram, which is why one has to recognize how important it is for India. Look at this distortion that has taken place, the division, the partition of India. We are still paying the price of that. So union has certain laws. There are certain conditions that can create union, and other conditions that create human distortions that can last decades, if not centuries, to allow the possibility for something new to come back. Auroville, the creation of Auroville, Mother says, to start with, is an attempt to prevent war. If you look at it from that point of view, Auroville has not prevented war. So what does she mean? Actually, in the 60s, there was this major worry in the world about a nuclear conflagration. We are right in the middle right now of the anniversary of the 6th of August and the 9th of August, when the 2 nuclear devices that were dropped upon populations took place, so Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The fact that it hasn't happened again is one of the miracles that we don't pay attention to, one of the graces that guide the world. So there are small conflicts, not so small for the people who are in them, but there hasn't been a worldwide conflict. And perhaps Auroville has played a role in that, perhaps Auroville has not played enough of the role that it should have. This is a question that we should ask ourselves in Auroville, because the aim of Auroville is union, and that has certain laws. There are things we are not allowed to do to each other to allow Auroville to come down into manifestation completely. But still, Mother says, what is needed is a piece of earth. And that piece of earth is given. This area is consecrated. It's interesting that when Sri Aurobindo is explaining what is asked for from the individual, and I think that's true for the collective also, he uses the word, in one of his letters, I think it's a letter to Dilip, he says that surrender is not, he's not satisfied with the word surrender. He says samarpan. So arpan is to be completely given. You belong to the divine. So what this yoga asks for is samarpan, a complete giving over where you do not belong to yourself anymore, you do not belong to your ego, you belong to the divine. And it is the divine who acts through you. In the period of the Arya, because Sri Aurobindo did most of his writing between 1914 and 1920. After that, he refuses to write another book. There are 8 volumes of his letters where he explains what the yoga is, but he no longer writes prose. What he's focused on is poetry, because he feels that poetry embodies his consciousness much more powerfully than prose does. Poetry, this pattern of rhythm, rhyme, meter, style, substance, vision, which is what Savitri represents, as we are sitting in the home of Savitri. That is what embodies what he's saying. And if you notice with poetry, there is never prescriptions. You get a description and you can interpret it. So this freedom Sri Aurobindo has given to all his disciples to take what he says, in whichever form he says it, and interpret it and try to understand it each in their own way. So Mother says, I insist on the fact that each one, she says, life itself growing and perfecting itself, each one in their own way. Above all, she says, each one in their own way. What does that mean? It's not the thought, it's not mystical means, it is life. And each of us expresses a unique form of manifestation in our embodiment, in our life, and that is the truth of what we need to find. So we cannot create prescriptive guidances, and so that's a contradiction. We have to be willing servitors of the divine consciousness, but each one in their own way. That's kind of like an impossible task. How do you know that you are serving? To be able to know you are serving, you have to be given. You cannot make choices for yourself. The choices are made by circumstance. Even the Bible says there is within us always a still small voice. The only way we can hear this voice, which is the voice of the psychic being, the Bible doesn't specify. Nobody speaks about the psychic being. Everyone speaks about soul. But because the psychic being comes into the picture if we are wanting to create an earthly life, which is a life divine. Because the psychic is an evolutionary soul. It is the one that's evolved from material inconscience. It's the spark of the soul. It's a spark soul. And by the time it comes to the human consciousness, it is capable of being a being, not a spark, meaning it has developed a form which is a state of being. So one of the things I think we have to reflect on is, what is the difference between being and doing? Can our doing emerge from a strong center of being? The Upanishads are constantly focusing on the difference between being and becoming. Becoming is the way mind, life and body flows out of us, and it's a process, it's in a movement, but at the center there is a still center, and that's the center of being. And she asks us as a first step to find that center, which is the still center. Again, there is not much advice that people say. I have heard Aurovillians say that, what are the steps this yoga demands? Because in other yoga systems you're given advice, you should meditate, you should do this. In fact, Mother makes a remark about Auroville that meditation is not much use. No, I mean, absolutely we have to learn how to meditate, but what she's meaning is our meditation itself has to be dynamic. It is in life itself that in whatever we are doing, we should be just alone with the divine. One must know how to be alone with the divine in the midst of all circumstances. That's the victory. If when you are doing 1,000 things, if when the world is coming at you, it's attacking you, if at that moment you can be in this still center, then you are in meditation. That means a dynamic meditation. The center of Auroville, Mother says, is called peace, but she says it's a dynamic peace. So what is the difference between static peace and a dynamic peace? Which means you carry the peace with you in whatever circumstances. And in some ways, that's what Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna to do. In the Bhagavad Gita, what is Arjuna being asked to do? It's one of the most, or the most terrible work that you can ask another human being to do. It's a ghoram kartavyam. He's being asked to kill. But Sri Krishna tells him, you are merely the instrument of the moment, nimita matram. Those who have to go will go regardless. It is destined that they have to die. Your choice is to be the instrument or not. So in some ways, how to embody instrumentality is the question that each of us must ask. And as long as we have a personal preference, as long as we have an inclination, as long as we prefer this to that, we are not an instrument. We are guided by the ego. Sri Aurobindo says that the ego is a helper. It helps you to individualize. The moment you are individualized, it becomes the bar, it becomes the block. Sri Aurobindo speaks about 4 master knots in human consciousness that we have to get over. So the first is desire. The Buddha gets caught by that idea. He says the world has come into being because of desire. And therefore, you need to abandon this world of desire and find a solution in moksha and nirvana. It is true, desire is the first. It's what impels you and what moves you forward. But the Upanishad says it's not desire that gives birth to the world, it is delight. So the manifestation has been created for delight, for ananda. And that is what Sri Aurobindo bases himself. So behind that first movement of desire, when you transcend the individual response, it becomes something much higher. So desire is a master knot. It has to be converted to its truth. Nothing can be removed from manifestation. It has to be transmuted into its truth. The second set of master knots are the gunas, tamas, rajas, sattva. Now in India we have been brought up to believe that the sattvic consciousness is the best. Right now in India there's a great celebration of Ram. Sri Aurobindo says the Ramachandra, the temple that's just been made in Ayodhya, represents the sattvic consciousness. So it's a mental consciousness, and the standard in India, the value in India has been for sattva. The best you can achieve is a sattvic consciousness. Not if you're doing yoga. In yoga you can transcend this. But ordinary people, the demand for ordinary Indians has been become sattvic. Do not be dominated by rajas and tamas. The Gita says no, you have to be seated above the gunas. You have to be tregunatita. He's telling, Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna, you have to be seated above the gunas and you use the guna that you need. Sri Aurobindo says that each of these gunas in the lower principle, tamas, on the higher principle, is the capacity for absolute peace, sam. So we have to convert the tamas, that's the obscurity in us, into the power of peace. And that's peace is a power. Peace is the first thing we have to bring into our consciousness. Rajas, converted, becomes tapas and tejas, the fire and the force of the divine manifesting through us. Sri Aurobindo's yoga demands a lot of tapas and tejas. So that has to be found. We cannot be, just sitting quietly in meditation. We have to energize everything. Energy is the source. And sattva, converted, becomes jyoti, the spiritual light. So the second master knot are the gunas, and they have to be transmuted, converted to their higher truth. The third master knot is dualities, this idea that this is good, this is bad, this is better, this is worse. There is a state of consciousness where you go beyond these dualities and you inhabit a wholeness, what modern quantum physics talks about, complementarities. So it's coming at us. We are living in a world where a certain level of consciousness is touching these truths, and we have to try to find a way to embody them. So the dualities, and of course the last master knot is the ego. In this yoga, unlike all the other yogas, you have to work on these master knots. In traditional yogas, you sit upon them. You just quieten them. You tell them, behave yourself. You're not going to interfere. But you don't transmute them. You don't change them. So they're sitting there. So Sri Aurobindo has a remark where he says, even the saint, you catch him in his ordinary state and all these tendencies can emerge at any moment. It's not satisfactory for Sri Aurobindo that these tendencies that come with the material substance remain. There's a really interesting conversation in the agenda where Satprim tells the mother, I have the feeling we betray you all the time. And she says, Maupati, I betray myself. What does she mean by that? What is mother saying? Because her physicality is still tied to the lower creation, is still death-bound. She embodies the highest divine consciousness in that body, but the body is finding it hard to keep up, which is why at some point in time, for whatever reason, that body gets abandoned because it's not able to be plastic enough. The new consciousness, the supramental state, the demand, the fundamental demand is plasticity. And if we look at all our bodies, all of us old-time Aurovillians, our bodies are less young now and they are less responsive. The bones are a bit calcified, and that energy we had when we were in our 20s and 30s, it's less present now. So in spite of all the aspiration we have, there is something about the body we have not changed. And the body ages, and because it ages, Sri Aurobindo calls it an obstinate habit, but that habit seems to be millennially present in our bodies. And that creates an issue for this yoga, because Even the Upanishad says you have to live 100 years. The Isha Upanishad invokes, may we live 100 summers doing works in the world. Auroville has managed to catch that a little bit because people don't retire in Auroville. And so you have 90-year-olds who are still cycling if their bodies allow them to. There is a youthfulness in Auroville which is very eternal in some ways, and that is magical about this society, that there is no retirement. I find that it helps a lot to look for the magic in the circumstances, even in the most difficult of circumstances. There is a line in Savitri where Sri Aurobindo says, all here is miracle and can by miracle change. So it's an attitude also. If we can see the miraculousness of what we are part of the grace that we are part of, then somehow that comes forward. She's even called that flower that grows wild in the forests of Auroville, miracle, and the second word is the air of Auroville. So even though Auroville looks presently as if it's going through a very difficult phase, that magic, that air of Auroville, that miraculousness of this experiment is still completely present, and we should be connected to that regardless of what's happening outwardly. And that connection creates another law of personal life and living, because whether the collectivity can do that, we as individuals can do that, and then we feed that energy into the collectivity, because we say in India, Jyot se Jyot. It is only a flaming light that can light another flaming light. So if we can be this flaming fire of consciousness, then somehow that truth of Auroville, which has not diminished even the least bit, it is completely present. We should have the faith. How to stay in that faith? Two things. To remain enthusiastic. You know, the Greek word enthusiasm means theos is God, and entheos is to be filled with the God energy. So when you're enthusiastic, there you are channeling the God energy, and to be grateful. So if we can keep enthusiasm and gratitude, somehow it puts us into the right space and right consciousness to allow to channel whatever is possible through us, in us and outward into the world around us. That is the demand of each individual. And if there would be enough individuals, another thing in India we talk about is satsanga, the company of the good. So if we can create that energizing of consciousness, where anyone who comes in contact with any of us is immediately uplifted. Mother says, don't hang around with people who pull you down. Don't be with people who make you lose your faith. Be with people who fill you with the faith in the future, because there is no doubt, not because of what we are doing or not doing, but because of what the work that Mother and Sri Aurobindo completed. It is because of that that we can hope for a beautiful future. So I thought that I will speak to you a little bit about Sri Aurobindo's diary notes, which were not found in his lifetime, which were not even found in Mother's lifetime, which later the ashram archives discovered its papers. There are stories that Puranida, he had to light the boiler early morning, and he finds all these papers, and he finds sometimes in the papers these handwritten notes of Sri Aurobindo, and he rescues them. This cannot be burnt, but so this was stuff that Sri Aurobindo was even giving for burning. But thanks to those who rescued these papers, we have something called, because everyone says, what is this yoga asking us to do? Sri Aurobindo gave himself a program which he called the Sapta Chatushtaya, which means the 7 fours. Now this is a program that he's putting upon himself. He has not, here and there in his writings he refers to this here and something else there, but he doesn't elaborate it too much. These are siddhis that he is trying to achieve in his physical consciousness, and he largely succeeds. The Sapta Chatushtaya, which means it's 28 and almost 30 siddhis. So the more you are freed of your lower nature, the more you are liberated from your lower nature, and that leads to siddhi, which means realization. And then Sri Aurobindo, these are the three things that all yogas ask you for. You have to be liberated from your lower nature. Even if you sit upon it, you don't transform it. In Sri Aurobindo's yoga, you have to transform it. Last, bhukti. So in Sri Aurobindo, the necessity of delight in manifestation is a fourth layer that Sri Aurobindo adds. In the synthesis, he follows in the synthesis the program that Sri Krishna gives Arjuna. He offers 3 yoga systems, which are psycho-spiritual, the yoga of divine works, the yoga of divine knowledge, and the yoga of divine love. And Sri Aurobindo adds a 4th layer, which is the yoga of self-perfection. So that 4th layer is what Sri Aurobindo is offering to the world. It's a yoga that has never been elaborated. It is there as intuitions in the Veda and the Upanishad, but it required it to be brought down into manifestation by a complete structure of pattern of growth and development. And so in the yoga of self-perfection, he talks about these 4 states that we have to bring into manifestation. So I thought I would talk to you about just the first, the Sapta Chatushtaya, but the first Chatushtaya, which he calls Shanti or Samata Chatushtaya. A couple of years, last year I think, I did this book for Bharat Nivas, which was a kind of an exploration of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. If any of you want it, I can send it to you as a PDF. It's lying as printed copies in Bharat Nivas. I no longer have a say on it, but it was exploring Sri Aurobindo's yoga in short, so that people can find what Sri Aurobindo is saying in a nutshell. So he calls it Samata, Shanti, Sukham, Hasyam, Iti, Shanti, Chatushtaya, and it's step 1. And there are 6 other steps to be achieved. He says then, because in his yoga, the first thing that we have to achieve to settle into our consciousness is samatha, is absolute total equality. The yoga cannot work in us if we are slightly disturbed and shaken. So it has to be samatha. There are 2 forms of samatha, he says. There is a passive form and an active form. Samatha, the passive form is when things come at you, and samatha, the active form, is how you react to them. So there are 2 responses that we can have. So the passive form is titiksha, udasinata, nati, iti samatha. So titiksha is the capacity for endurance. If you look at Western psychology, you have the Stoic philosophy. The Stoic philosophy is the capacity to endure whatever life throws at you. And if you look at Sri Aurobindo's life, the capacity to endure difficulty without complaining, neither mother nor he complained. Sometimes Satprem says to mother that you take everything so lightly. She says, when it's most serious, I laugh. And this is how Sri Aurobindo also deals with difficulties in life. He laughs. Because it's a good response to difficulty. You laugh about it. So titiksha is the capacity to endure. Once you have the capacity to endure whatever life throws at you, it doesn't matter, you touch the transcendence of the gunas, udasinata. You seat yourself above the gunas. So first you have to endure, then you have to seat yourself above the gunas, which means none of these gunas control your consciousness, you stand above them, and you're always in peace. So Mother says you have to be like a mountain. Anything that comes at the mountain, it observes it coming, but it is not disturbed. It is. It's solid. It's dynamically there. After you have achieved titiksa and udasinata, you arrive at this process of self-giving, nati, you are given. And Sri Aurobindo says, this is passive samatha, iti samatha. Now, what about the active? He explains in his, I've taken this out of his diary notes in the record of yoga. The active principle is rasa, pritir, ananda, iti sarvananda. So, in India we have something that we call the navarasas, meaning the 9 flavors that life comes at you. And if you look at all the dancers, and if, most art in India in the traditional sense was hierarchic. It was expressing an aspiration for the divine. And actually you will hear a lot of traditional artists saying that their art is their yoga. They're doing their art as a yoga. And so in some ways, if you follow the traditional Indian approach, it is a kind of a yoga. And people are quite conscious of that. Unfortunately, the world is becoming one, and so people are losing even the contact with these great Indian ideas. So there are flavors that life comes at you with, and that is the flavor and the taste of life, how you taste it. And you have to be there are 9, it's called navarasas, but there are 8 and 8 includes something that can bring disgust, something that can bring fear, something that can bring courage. But the final, the 9th, is Shanti. So it's when you achieve all of the 8 that you arrive at the state of complete peace, Shanti. And that is the 9th flavor. So first you have to, Sri Aurobindo says, if there is the least disturbance or trouble in the mentality, we may be perfectly sure that there is a disturbance or defect in the samatha. The buddhi, the manas, the heart, the nerves, the very bodily case must be subjected to the laws of samatha. Shanti may be a vast calm based on udasinata, or a vast joyous calm based on nati, when you are self-given, when you have samarpan yourself. The former is apt to associate itself with a tendency to inaction, and it is therefore the latter, the self-giving, that we need for our yoga. So he says, not enough, the first one, no? Because that creates passivity, and in his yoga there cannot be passivity. It has to be always active. Pritir is whatever life gives to you, you turn it into something very joyful. You receive it, even if the most painful touch. There is this story when Sri Aurobindo fell and broke his hip. It was dislocated. So it must have been frightfully painful. And because it is Sri Aurobindo doesn't call for help. Sri Aurobindo doesn't ask people to do things. They have to notice. His attendants had to always notice what he needed. He never said, do this. And so somebody finds him on the floor and said, what were you doing for that time when nobody found him? He says, I was converting the pain into fierce ananda, raudra ananda. So he's not wasting his time. He has this terrible pain of a broken hip, fever, and he's converting it into delight, into fierce ananda. So whatever comes at you, you can convert it. You don't have to respond in the way it's coming. This is Sri Aurobindo's example. So it should turn into pritir and delight, joy, fullness. The amount of importance Sri Aurobindo and Mother give to beauty and delight. This yoga is all about beauty and delight. Mother's telling the ashram kids in education, let beauty be your constant presence. Beauty of thought, beauty of sentiment, beauty of action, beauty around you. And she's given us so much. Look at this. This is bird of paradise. This is fire. Depending on the color of the flower, it's a different type of fire. You look at Mother Nature, and she has given us a kind of a conscious contact with nature that no other yoga gives us. And that's so, so powerful. In the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo has a paragraph where he's referring to this first Chatushtaya, the Shanti Chatushtaya. The final stage is Hasyam. He says, Hasyam is the active side of Sukham. It consists in an inner state of gladness, cheerfulness, which no adverse experience, mental or physical, can trouble. Its perfection is the stamp and seal of God on the siddhi of the samatha. So you have to be laughing all the time. And Sri Aurobindo says a humorous God could not have created this universe, so you have to laugh with him. In the synthesis of yoga, he doesn't call it the Chatushtaya, but he says that if you want to measure that you are in the yoga, this is what you need. There are 4 things that the sadhak must have. First, equality. In the most concrete, practical sense of the word, samatha. Freedom from mental, vital, physical preferences, and even acceptance of all God's workings within and around him. This is so hard for Aurovillians right now. We do not have an even acceptance of what God, because finally whatever is happening in manifestation, in the end there is the one who is somehow in charge and is using this way because it seems to be the shortest way to arrive at solution. Sometimes you have to take a dark passage to arrive at a solution. So we have to have a complete acceptance of all God's workings within and around him. That's number 1. Secondly, a firm peace and absence of all disturbance and trouble, shanti. Thirdly, a positive inner spiritual happiness and spiritual ease of the natural being which nothing can lessen. Meaning, at whatever life throws at you, you have a spiritual ease, you have a well-being because you're seated on the lap of the mother. Sukham, Sri Aurobindo calls that. And fourthly, a clear joy and laughter of the soul, embracing life and existence. To be equal is to be infinite and universal, not to limit oneself, not to bind oneself down to this or that form of the mind and life and its partial preferences and desires. That's step 1. So there is a program, there is a process, and I wish we Aurovillians would seek it, look at it, try to understand it and try to embody it. We have a lot of work to do.
The Life Divine, Chapter 1, The Human Aspiration. She follows to the goal of those that are passing on beyond. She is the first in the eternal succession of the dawns that are coming. Usha widens, bringing out that which lives, awakening someone who is dead. What is her scope when she harmonizes with the dawns that shone out before and those that now must shine? She desires the ancient mornings and fulfills their light. Projecting forwards her illumination, she enters into communion with the rest that are to come. Kutsa Angirasa, Rig Veda. Threefold are those supreme births of this divine force that is in the world. They are true, they are desirable. He moves there, wide overt, within the infinite, and shines pure, luminous, and fulfilling. That which is immortal in mortals and possessed of the truth is a God, and established inwardly as an energy working out in our divine powers. Become high uplifted, O strength, pierce all veils, manifest in us the things of the Godhead. Vamadeva, Rig Veda. The earliest preoccupation of man in his awakened thoughts, and as it seems his inevitable and ultimate preoccupation, for it survives the longest periods of skepticism and returns after every banishment, is also the highest which his thought can envisage. It manifests itself in the divination of Godhead, the impulse towards perfection, the search after pure truth and unmixed bliss, the sense of a secret immortality. The ancient dawns of human knowledge have left us their witness to this constant aspiration. Today, we see a humanity satiated but not satisfied by victorious analysis of the externalities of nature, preparing to return to its primeval longings. The earliest formula of wisdom promises to be its last: God, light, freedom, immortality. These persistent ideals of the race are at once the contradiction of its normal experience and the affirmation of higher and deeper experiences which are abnormal to humanity and only to be attained in their organized entirety by a revolutionary individual effort or an evolutionary general progression. To know, possess, and be the divine being in an animal and egoistic consciousness, to convert our twilit or obscure physical mentality into the plenary supramental illumination, to build peace and a self-existent bliss where there is only a stress of transitory satisfactions, besieged by physical pain and emotional suffering, to establish an infinite freedom in a world which presents itself as a group of mechanical necessities, to discover and realize the immortal life in a body subjected to death and constant mutation. This is offered to us as the manifestation of God in matter and the goal of nature in her terrestrial evolution. To the ordinary material intellect, which takes its present organization of consciousness for the limit of its possibilities, the direct contradiction of the unrealized ideals with the realized fact is a final argument against their validity. But if we take a more deliberate view of the world's workings, that direct opposition appears rather as part of nature's profoundest method and the seal of her completest sanction. For all problems of existence are essentially problems of harmony. They arise from the perception of an unsolved discord and the instinct of an undiscovered agreement or unity. To rest content with an unsolved discord is possible for the practical and more animal part of man, but impossible for his fully awakened mind, and usually even his practical parts only escape from the general necessity either by shutting out the problem or by accepting a rough, utilitarian, and unillumined compromise. For essentially, all nature seeks a harmony. Life and matter in their own sphere as much as mind in the arrangement of its perceptions. The greater the apparent disorder of the materials offered, or the apparent disparateness, even to irreconcilable opposition of the elements that have to be utilized, the stronger is the spur, and it drives towards a more subtle and puissant order than can normally be the result of a less difficult endeavor. The accordance of active life with a material form in which the condition of activity itself seems to be inertia is one problem of opposites that nature has solved and seeks always to solve better with greater complexities, for its perfect solution would be the material immortality of a fully organized, mind-supporting animal body. the accordance of conscious mind and conscious will with a form and a life in themselves, not overtly self-conscious, and capable at best of a mechanical or subconscious will, is another problem of opposites in which she has produced astonishing results and aims always at higher marvels. For there, her ultimate miracle would be an animal consciousness no longer seeking, but possessed of truth and light, with the practical omnipotence which would result from the possession of a direct and perfected knowledge. Not only, then, is the upward impulse of man towards the accordance of yet higher opposites rational in itself, but it is the only logical completion of a rule and an effort that seem to be a fundamental method of nature and the very sense of her universal strivings. We speak of the evolution of life and matter, the evolution of mind in matter. But evolution is a word which merely states the phenomenon without explaining it. For there seems to be no reason why life should evolve out of material elements or mind out of living form, unless we accept the Vedantic solution that life is already involved in matter and mind in life, because in essence, matter is a form of veiled life, a form of veiled consciousness. And then there seems to be little objection to a farther step in the series, and the admission that the mental consciousness may itself be only a form and a veil of higher states which are beyond mind. In that case, the unconquerable impulse of man towards God, light, bliss, freedom, immortality, presents itself in its right place in the chain as simply the imperative impulse by which nature is seeking to evolve beyond mind, and appears to be as natural, true, and just as the impulse towards life which she has planted in certain forms of matter, or the impulse towards mind which she has planted in certain forms of life. As there, so here, the impulse exists more or less obscurely in her different vessels with an ever-ascending series in the power of its will to be. As there, so here, it is gradually evolving and bound fully to evolve the necessary organs and faculties. As the impulse towards mind ranges from the more sensitive reactions of life in the metal and the plant up to its full organization in man, so in man himself there is the same ascending series, the preparation, if nothing more, of a higher and divine life. The animal is a living laboratory in which nature has, it is said, worked out man. Man himself may well be a thinking and living laboratory in whom and with whose conscious cooperation she wills to work out the Superman, the God, or, shall we not say rather, to manifest God. For if evolution is the progressive manifestation by nature of that which slept or worked in her, involved, it is also the overt realization of that which she secretly is. We cannot then bid her pause at a given stage of her evolution, nor have we the right to condemn with the religionist as perverse and presumptuous, or with the rationalist as a disease or hallucination, any intention she may evince or effort that she may make to go beyond. If it be true that spirit is involved in matter, and apparent nature is secret God, then the manifestation of the divine in himself and the realization of God within and without are the highest and most legitimate aim possible to man upon earth. Thus, the eternal paradox and eternal truth of a divine life in an animal body, an immortal aspiration or reality inhabiting a mortal tenement, a single and universal consciousness representing itself in limited minds and divided egos, a transcendent, indefinable, timeless, and spaceless being who alone renders time and space and cosmos possible. And in all these, the higher truth realizable by the lower term justify themselves to the deliberate reason as well as to the persistent instinct or intuition of mankind. Attempts are sometimes made to have done finally with questionings which have so often been declared insoluble by logical thought, and to persuade men to limit their mental activities to the practical and immediate problems of their material existence in the universe. But such evasions are never permanent in their effect. Mankind returns from them with a more vehement impulse of inquiry or a more violent hunger for an immediate solution. By that hunger, mysticism profits, and new religions arise to replace the old that have been destroyed or stripped of significance by a skepticism which itself could not satisfy because, although its business was inquiry, it was unwilling sufficiently to inquire. The attempt to deny or stifle a truth because it is yet obscure in its outward workings and too often represented by obscurantist superstition or a crude faith is itself a kind of obscurantism. The will to escape from a cosmic necessity because it is arduous, difficult to justify by immediate tangible results, slow in regulating its operations, must turn out eventually to have been no acceptance of the truth of nature, but a revolt against the secret, mightier will of the Great Mother. It is better and more rational to accept what she will not allow us as a race to reject, and lift it from the sphere of blind instinct, obscure intuition, and random aspiration into the light of reason and an instructed and consciously self-guiding will. And if there is any higher light of illumined intuition or self-revealing truth, which is now in man either obstructed and inoperative, or works with intermittent glancings as if from behind a veil, or with occasional displays as of the northern lights in our material skies, then there also we need not fear to aspire. For it is likely that such is the next higher state of consciousness, of which mind is only a form and veil, and through the splendors of that light may lie the path of our progressive self-enlargement into whatever highest state is humanity's ultimate resting place. This is the original edition of The Life Divine, published as a book in 1939, and it says in its inscription, "To Kapali, with blessings, Sri Aurobindo." We enjoyed the enchantment of a number of people, bright souls who came to read line by line the words of Sri Aurobindo and to discuss what those lines meant. These Sunday nights we've reserved primarily over the years for materials which we thought were pragmatic, which would help us in the practice of the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. But we have agreed to take this up because The Life Divine is a record in rational form of Sri Aurobindo's inner yogic experiences. And as such, call us, or call to us in a different way, the realities that those experiences represent. In other words, as we study these passages, if we are open, we will feel the pressing of those energies and those states of consciousness upon us from above, opening up within us to emerge. And so I suggest that there will be a practical dimension to our study of the life divine. This first chapter, The Human Aspiration, which we've just read aloud from beginning to end, is the only one that we could probably read aloud from beginning to end in the compass of a single evening. Oh, the second and third are relatively short as well. I concur. But to hear the magic of his words, even read so poorly as by this fellow, is worth it, I think. Now, let's back up and look again at the first chapter. I think we noted that on the 25th of June in 1914, Sri Aurobindo made a note in his private diary that this essay had come and he had written it in great clarity and rapidity. I think it bears mentioning again too that when Sri Aurobindo recast the Life Divine, he made minor changes, major additions to many chapters, wrote entirely new chapters to flesh out his vision. But whenever he looked again and again at the first chapter, he found it to be fine, just as it was. Clear. I think we are allowed to say something that he would never say, that it is inspired, directly transmitted from a higher consciousness onto the printed page. So, the human aspiration begins with a pair of mottos. That's what Sri Aurobindo called these Vedic and Upanishadic citations that we'll meet at the beginning of every chapter. The first one is from a rishi whose name is Kutsa Angirasa. Angirasa, by itself, connotes a family devoted to the mystic fire, to Agni. Kutsa we meet often in the Rig Veda, and in one place he travels upwards with the god of the divine mind, Indra, until they reach the plenitude of being which is natural to Indra. And so much has Kutsa been identified with the god, so much does the same blood flow through both, that none can tell them apart, except for Indra's wife, who knows immediately the difference. She can distinguish. But it's an idea in Kutsa, in his life, in what he achieved in his inner being, that we are to soar and become one with the divine above. But Kutsa always returns to the earth. Here, in this citation from the first book of the Rig Veda, I think it's the 113th hymn, which is devoted to Usha, the dawn. We see something that is perfectly apposite, not only to the opening of the life divine, the idea that the dawn is rising, bringing that illumination, but appears in Sri Aurobindo's great epic poem as well, Savitri. Savitri opens with the dawn. Savitri also closes with the dawn. Dawn after dawn, dawn succeeding dawn is the image. Until finally, there is a permanent dawn. That permanent dawn would be the supramental age, which we aspire She follows to the goal of those that are passing on beyond. She is the first in the eternal succession of the dawns that are coming. Usha widens, bringing out that which lives, awakening someone who was dead. What is her scope when she harmonizes with the dawns that shone out before and those that now must shine? She desires the ancient mornings and fulfills their light. Projecting forwards her illumination, she enters into communion with the rest that are to come. So the idea is that this light is born in us and has its fulfillment in the day as it grows. Then, having spent that illumination, there is a cycling back. And when darkness comes, it isn't a full covering up of the light, it isn't a loss of the light, but it is a period of digestion, of assimilation. And the previous dawn is followed by the next dawn, which, remembering the past, carries all that was experienced before with it, pointing always towards the future. So there is this constant motion of progress that the dawn suggests is available to us, natural to the manifestation, key to the cosmos. The second one is from Vamadeva. It's from the fourth book, an even older book than the first. And it really is an invocation of Agni, the mystic fire, the sacrificial flame. It says, threefold are those supreme births of this divine force that is in the world. They are true, they are desirable. Those threefold aspects of him, which are born above, we would call in succeeding ages Satchit Ananda. True being, true consciousness, true delight. And it says, he moves there wide overt within the infinite and shines pure, luminous, and fulfilling. So the Agni that we have here, up there, moves fully liberated, does not have to be ignited, because it is always alive, always aware, delighted, sure of itself and its steps. But here is the question for us. What do we do with Agni? That which is immortal in mortals and possessed of the truth is a God and established inwardly as an energy working out in our divine powers. This is that same Agni, manifest here. He's not only on the sacrificial altar, but he's inside of us, and he stirs us into activity. And with his energy, pushes into manifestation all the potentialities that lie within us. So they can't rest undiscovered, untapped. Agni stimulates us, pushes us. So we invoke him and say, become high uplifted, O strength. Rise up in us. Rise up. Be strong. Pierce all veils. All the obscurities that meet us, level after level as we aspire, have to be burnt up. The smoke has to be cleared away as the flame consumes the fuel. Manifest in us the things of the Godhead. So bring out all that is within. So the idea of an eternal succession of dawns, the idea of this immortal stationed within our mortal being that wants to manifest all of our potentials, leads us to these first sentences of Sri Aurobindo. He's chosen them well. The earliest preoccupation of man in his awakened thoughts, and as it seems, his inevitable and ultimate preoccupation, is also the highest which his thought can envisage. So this is a Vedic assonance. This, in India, would be the old Vedic knowledge. In other climes, in other parts of the world, it may also have had its own iteration, but it would be similar in theme, because it is built in the human, whether we use the Sanskrit language to express it or some other language. This aspiration towards this formula of the human uncovers for us God, light, freedom, immortality is the same, irrepressible. And they're persistent ideals. They are perhaps not satisfied in the normal rounds of our life, but in their organized entirety, he says, they can be attained by a revolutionary individual effort or an evolutionary general progression. The revolutionary effort is, of course, yoga, where we become volitional. We apply our will and intentionally, forcefully advance beyond the confines of what limits us. Never satisfied with what we've done, we always push farther. If you're any good at yoga, that's what you do. Or the evolutionary general progression is the slow method which nature takes, which carries us, presenting to us experience after experience. Whatever that web of experience is, we digest it. And even if we are not aspiring with the force of a yogin, still we move forward. The waves of evolution carry us commonly forward, but that takes eons. In yoga, we can achieve in the span of a life a great change of consciousness, introduce to the world new powers and awarenesses, new energies, and keep within our view possibilities which seem to the person bound by materiality to be fanciful or impossible. But just as when Sri Aurobindo was writing in the Isha Upanishad, in his commentary, calling our attention to how the Upanishad poses to the mind these oppositions of the divine and nature. This oppositional pole is part of nature's greater method. It is a profound method that seals her completest sanction. We can't rest until we've answered the greatest question. Nature is looking for harmony. All problems of existence are problems of harmony, Sri Aurobindo says. So where we find oppositions within ourselves, between the immortal that's within us and what seems to be a death-bound vehicle, our bodies, which have a terminus, have an end, or whether it's the individual struggling against social confines, or whether it's the limitation of the ego, trying to find absorption into a transcendent reality that washes clear of all boundaries. All of these things speak to us about something that is attainable, because every opposition in nature is a clue to what may be impossible now, but will be possible tomorrow. We think when we look at a discord, we think when we have our hopes dashed by an effort which fails to succeed, that's the end of the business. But to nature, it is the beginning of a series of efforts. And Sri Aurobindo brings us back to the idea that the sophistication with which nature arranges a solution to a problem and then betters it again and again, takes a beginning victory, compounds, multiplies, adds sophistication and subtlety to it. Something that he's writing about in 1914, Ilya Prigogine received, I believe, a Nobel Prize for, in formulating something that he called dissipative structuring, which means when an open system is challenged from outside and its very existence is in question, it can throw itself into a new, more delicate, but more complete answer to the challenge and arrive at a still different system, which will actually resolve all the old dilemmas and provide a new synthesis. So not only is the threat of demise erased, but there is a new richness and a new forward momentum. So Sri Aurobindo, 60 years before, put it in plain English. The accordance of active life with the material of form, in which the condition of activity itself seems to be inertia, is one problem of opposites that nature has solved and seeks always to solve better with greater complexities. For its perfect solution would be the material immortality of a fully organized mind-supporting animal body. The context of the challenge there. But next, the accordance of conscious mind and conscious will with the form and the life in themselves, not overtly self-conscious and capable at best of a mechanical or subconscious will, is another problem of opposites in which